How's everybody doing today? It is March 21st, kind of a chilly, cold day outside. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope you enjoyed your break. Welcome back to class. We are now on chapter 12 of our adjustment psychology textbook. Okay. I see we have a couple people in the audience. Thanks for coming today. I do appreciate that. Hi, Iris. Always good to see you. Thanks for coming. Hope you had a great break and you're ready to get back and get started. You know, something interesting we're going to talk about in class this week. The latest happiness index came out, ranking all of the countries around the world in terms of their happiness. The United States came in a solid number, 15. Top 10% can't complain. We're going to talk about that in a webinar this week, Iris. But thanks for coming. Right now, we are going to go ahead and talk about chapter 11. I said chapter 12, sorry. Chapter 11, gender and behavior this week, Iris. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about a little bit about the differences between males and females, some of the observed differences you might see between males and females on any number of dimensions, from the way they think to the way they feel to the way they act. I'm going to clarify the difference between biological sex and gender, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the forces that socialize us to our given genders. And we're going to talk about some of the problems associated with these gender roles, the limitations of them, and we're going to talk a little bit about how they are changing, especially in webinar this week. We're going to talk about, because some of these gender socialization things that I talk about, I think, are going to be 10 and 15 years older, more similar to my generation than your generation. So we're going to see how gender role socialization is changing as time moves on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay. Now, your book's going to talk about a lot of research on males and female differences. And they're going to introduce to you the concept of a meta-analysis. Now, in science, we gain information by doing experiments and correlational studies. And so I might run an experiment to see if males and females are different on, let's say, one particular skill like rotating blocks. And then my friend does an experiment and he has something that's similar, but instead of rotating blocks, it's moving balls and colors, and he's looking at the difference between males and females. And let's say 20 of us do psychological experimental studies on gender differences. What a meta-analysis is, it's a study that combines a bunch of studies together to find out if there are any trends between groups that you can see that go over multiple studies. And so a meta-analysis combines the statistical results of many studies that are related to the same question, yielding an estimate of the size and consistency of these differences. So there have been a lot of research studies about the intellectual abilities of males and females. And so a meta-analysis looks across a bunch of studies to see if you can see themes that go across these studies. And so that's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of slides. Some of these general differences that we see going across studies. One of the differences you will see when it comes to intellectual functioning is that males do tend to be better with what we would call spatial reasoning abilities, which is typically controlled by the parietal lobe of the brain, and that's your ability to think about directions, to think about how objects relate to each other in space. It's your ability to turn blocks in your mind. So if I wanted you to tell me if these were the same blocks or if they were mirror image blocks, you would have to turn one around in your mind to compare them to see if they were exactly the same shape. That's a mental rotation task. And what you're going to see is that in general, males tend to be better at these if, tasks, intellectual tasks involving spatial orientation and spatial reasoning. Okay. However, what you're going to notice is that your females tend to have better verbal skills than do males. And so, what you're going to look and see is that girls typically say their first word and start talking earlier than boys. They tend to have larger vocabularies and better reading scores. Now, boys can do better with some verbal reasoning tasks, but they're more likely to have language related disorders like stuttering and dyslexia. So typically, and that's actually one of the things you need to consider if you have a little boy and your little boy's birthday makes it such that they can enter kindergarten as a young kindergartner, right? So there's a cutoff age when you can go into kindergarten. And like my son Zachary, his birthday was in October, so he was either going to be the youngest kid in class or the oldest kid in class. One of the things that you need to consider before you send your 5-year-old boy, this is more important for boys than for girls, is to make sure that your boy has the maturity and the language skills, the ability to express themselves, their needs, their emotions, what they what they need. Because one of the things that's really going to create a bad sort of first experience is to put a boy that is too immature and doesn't have the language abilities to communicate and participate as a kindergartner. Some young 5-year-old boys are able to, but it's something that you really need to think about before you start your young boy early in kindergarten because their language deficits are going to kind of come back against them. Now, people have always talked about math skill, boys being better at math than females. That was sort of an accepted belief. It's sort of one of those tropes, if you will, stereotypes about men versus women that's existed throughout the 20th century. And the thing is, that may be based more on gender socialization than real intellectual ability between males and females. So what you're going to find is that really, truth be told, when it comes down to performance, there is no difference between male and female math performance in general. However, your boys are going to have more positive attitude towards math. Again, this is the socialization part. And you will see that some boys are better than some of your top intellectual math boys are going to be better at the complex solving than the girls. It's sort of an interesting thing that you're going to notice about male and females when it comes to measured difference of intellectual functioning. You're going to find more males at the extremes than you will find females. So on IQ scores, I think female IQ scores are actually a little bit higher in terms of average than males. Not much, but what you're going to see is they're going to be more gifted males than females, and they're going to be more males down in the intellectually deficient range. So you're going to see more boys at the extremes of the educational ends than you will see for females. And it's the same with these math skills. Math men, males outperform females at the high end of the distribution. So when we get to the really, really gifted students, you will see a little difference between males and females. But in general, there are no real differences between mathematical abilities of males and females. And as you notice in the blue note I have down here, since the pattern emerges late, researchers suggest that this may be due to gender role socialization, which we're going to talk about a little later in the class. I would say that gender role socialization, if it did have an effect, it had an effect uh, in the past because I don't think uh, 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 that stereotype exists that females are somehow deficient in math. I don't know, maybe some of my 16 and 17-year-old students can tell me how you think about it, but I think that might be a stereotype of an older generation. Now, comparisons of self-esteem. So we can talk about intellectual abilities, males and females. So the boys are better at spatial orientation. The females have better language abilities, and the and there are no mathematical differences. So let's look at personality. One of the most interesting personality qualities to look at is self-esteem. It's the global evaluation we have towards self, how positive we feel towards ourselves. Just a general, I like Chris or I don't like Chris. Now, there's a 10-item scale to measure self-esteem, a scientifically validated scale called the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. And one of the things you will notice is the 8-year-old children have the highest self-esteem on the planet. Your self-esteem will never be as high as it is in kindergarten, first grade, and second grade. 8-year-olds just think they're the bee's knees. But what you're going to notice about self-esteem over the course of the lifetime is that it drops precipitously in the teenage years. And actually, about 18 or 19 or 20, you are probably in general at your lowest level of self-esteem. So we're at the highest level of self-esteem over the course of our lifetime at 8, and in the next 10 years, puberty and life is just going to tank your self-esteem. And then what happens is self-esteem continues to gradually come back over the course of our lifetime. And when we're in our 50s, your self-esteem is going to finally be back up almost where it was when you were an 8-year-old, but not quite. And so we have this weird pattern with self-esteem that you'll notice over the lifetime. One of the things you do notice is that there tends to be a lower level of self-esteem in females than males across most of the lifespan. Now, whether or not it's a steep difference, people used to say body image problems were related to steeper drops in the teenage years for females than for males. Again, this is one of those meta-analytic findings where I think the drop is not as steep as was hypothesized. But what you're going to notice across the lifespan until the mid 50s, males in general are going to tend to feel a little more confidence and better about themselves than are females. Interesting, right? Now, when it comes to aggressive behavior, you can look at the statistics right here underneath me. When it comes to violent, aggressive behavior, that is almost universally a male thing. Look at the people the sentenced prisoners for different kinds of serious violent violent behaviors: rape, sexual assault, robbery, murder, assault, all violent crimes. If you'll look, they are 95 to 98% male crimes. So when it comes to physical aggression, there is no doubt that males are more physically aggressive than females. However, one of the things you will notice, and I think this is one of those middle school things, one of the things you will see is females are really good at relational aggression. So while your females in 7th and 8th grade may not be having fisticuffs and fighting physically in the bathroom, females are going to use a different form of aggression where they hurt people by cutting them out of social groups, making them feel bad about themselves. So this is what we would call relational aggression or indirect aggression. So females do have outlets for being aggressive, but as a general rule, they tend to be not as physical in their demonstration of aggressive behaviors. Now, other gender comparisons. Are men more sexual than females? Well, men tend to engage in more sexual activity. They tend to have more sexual partners, and they tend to be more permissive in their attitudes towards their sex. Men are more likely to engage in casual sex, use pornography, they masturbate more often. Um, and there are some people who would suggest, and I'm not sure if that's true now or if this is an older cultural norm, as a general rule, women were are or were socialized to feel more guilt and shame in response to sex. I see we have a couple of students on the broadcast right now. If you are, I'm 53, so I represent the class of 69. I grew up in the 1970s and 80s, and sexual attitudes were definitely more conservative than they are now. And there were definitely gender differences in how we were socialized. Guys were socialized to be a little more sexual. The females, if they engaged in sexual behavior, they tended to get a reputation and negative things were said about them. I'm curious now, Iris, for those of you who may be younger than me, are those attitudes still like they were for us? So, are women socialized to feel more guilt and shame response to sex? If I have a couple of younger students on the broadcast, if you want to speak out in the chat bar, I'd be interested to hear your opinion on the matter. Now, females are more likely to express emotions. However, males and females do not differ in how they feel emotions. It's just there are differences in socialization about whether or not men can demonstrate certain emotions and how they can demonstrate them. Turns out females are much better at reading nonverbals, what you are saying with your face and your body posture, and they tend to be better at communicating. It turns out that the health of long-term romantic relationships is highly correlated with the male's ability to communicate. The idea being that most females are good at interpersonal communication. However, some men aren't, and that's what causes problems in relationships. So, as a general rule, what you're going to find is that females do tend to have um, better communication abilities. Now, down here it talks about male interruptions, what some people call mansplaining, and that does happen. Although powerful women do the same thing. So it may not be so much a male thing as it might be a social power thing. Males have typically been more socially dominant in our culture, a patriarchal society, if you will. So maybe they felt uh, more able to butt into discussions. However, like they said, powerful women do the same thing. So maybe it was a power dimension and not a gender dimension. Uh, Now, when it comes to looking at clinical problems, what you're going to notice when it comes to psychological disorders, you can sort of group psychological disorders in terms of whether or not the symptoms are externalized, visible, involve acting out, or whether or not the symptoms are internalizing, which occur primarily in the person's own mind and imagination. So, for example, having impulse control problems or being a schizophrenic is sort of an acting out behavior where you can clearly see that there's something wrong with that person. That's an externalizing disorder. On the other hand, depression or anxiety, you can walk around all day and people might not know you have an anxiety problem or a depression problem because the problem exists only or exists in your mind, right? In a sense, instead of behavior. What you're going to notice, they do look at incidence rates. When we get to clinical psychology, we'll talk about incidence rates. What you're going to see is that the incidence rates that males have a higher incidence rate of externalizing disorders than do females. So you're going to see more male schizophrenics, more males with impulse control, more males with conduct disorder, more of these externalizing disorders. You're going to see more males than females. On the other hand, when it comes to anxiety and depression, these internalizing disorders, the incidence rate shows that more females than males are going to be depressed or anxious. So there actually is a gender difference or a sex difference between psychological disorder types. So as you can see, there are differences between males and females, not with overall intellectual ability, but females seem to be better at talking and males seem to be better at rotating things in their mind. Um, Males tend to be more physically aggressive, have higher self-esteem than do females. Um, Males have more acting out disorders. Females have more internalizing disorders. So these are kind of the differences that we've observed between males and females. Now, there is also neurological research where they're trying to figure out brain differences, morphological differences between the shapes and sizes of brain organs in males and females. And the differences are so slight that it's really hard to see any of them. The one I have noticed is that I think the hypothalamus, which is responsible for motivated behaviors and the sexual drive, I think that tends to be a little bit bigger in males than it does in females. But overall, you're not really going to see any differences in the brains of males and females. So you probably don't see that many differences between male and female functioning. And the question we begin to ask is, if the brains look the same and if the differences are small, to what degree does culture affect the way we perform, right? So there are slight differences between males and females, but are those because male brains and female brains are different from one another? Or do they represent some sort of effect that our culture has on how we are raised? So that's sort of the point of the next part of my argument that we're going to be talking about. So here you go. As you see, brain organization. What you're going to see, males have more cerebral specialization. Your males depend more heavily on the right hemisphere, and on the left hemisphere are actually your female brains tend to be connected a little bit better together with the corpus callosum, and so the two halves of the brain work together. Whereas for the males, there tends to be more cerebral specialization. Interesting thing, language typically is processed. The words and grammar of language are typically processed in the left side of your brain. The ability to read faces and emotions is more located on the right side of your brain. So in order to fully communicate, you sort of have to have these two parts of the brain working together. I don't know if any of you have ever been around a person that really just can't read the room or has no coolness. A lot of times, what you're going to notice, what you're seeing is a person's ability to utilize that facial recognition part of their brain. It's not, in a sense, as good or as connected as yours. Good morning, Ronrico. Wow. Blast from the past. Ronique from last semester's here. Thanks for stopping in, Ronique. We're just talking about the differences between males and females and gender socialization. Now, this right here, this slide tries to suggest that maybe brain differences between males and females represent some sort of evolutionary adaptation. Females being the smaller of the species and the less strong of the species was relegated to taking care of the young and communicating, nurturing, whereas the male being bigger and stronger maybe is out doing the hunting and killing, and that sort of evolved the brains. However, as I suggested to you, there really is no difference, noticeable difference between these two sizes of the brain. Oh, thank you, Ronick. That's awfully nice of you. So the reality is gender differences are quite small. Similarities typically outweigh the differences, and gender only accounts for a small proportion of the difference between individuals. And you can look at this picture right down here. You'll see my two graphs, and you'll see. So this is sort of, I think this is IQ right here. What you're going to see is there may be a little bit of a difference, uh, but the overlap is so much that really we're more similar than we are different per se. Okay. Now, that makes me so if it's not biology, then we look to culture. Now, one of the things I want to point out, you all probably know this. I know you know this, but if you don't, I have to make sure that you don't get out of this class with knowing. Sex refers to the biology and genetic aspects of being male or female, whether you have the X chromosomes or you have the X and Y chromosome, and how your secondary sex characteristics develop. Okay, so sex refers to the biology, the biological and genetic aspects of sex. Gender, on the other hand, represents the beliefs, the interests, the thoughts that we have that are consistent with being either a male or a female. And if you look over here, there's some terms to think about it. So, gender is your mental state of being male or female, not the biological state of being male or female. And then we typically talk about people having a gender identity. I feel like a male. You may feel like a male or a female, or you may have indeterminate feelings. That's your gender identity. Now, we all agree that there are gender stereotypes. There are things that guys do, and there are things that girls do. There are things that guys like and things that girls like. And we talk about these gender stereotypes. Whether they're wrong or right is a different question, but they do exist, if you will. Okay. And then let's see, gender roles. Uh, Gender roles are sort of the pre-assigned social roles that we engage in as we go through life. For somehow or another, at least in my culture, men taking the garbage out is a gender role. I am required to take the garbage out. Every male in my family takes the garbage out. I'm not sure how that became a male duty, but that is our gender role. In a lot of cultures, what you're going to notice is that it's the female's role to cook and provide food for the family. These are just culturally identified differences, culturally identified expectations. And then, in a sense, we all identify with these roles or don't identify with these roles. So, how male are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Do you act like do you follow all the male roles in every situation? Or do you have a mix of male and female role activities that you do? For example, I cook in my house and I wash the clothes in my house. Now, from where I come from, southern Georgia, those are female gender roles. All right. So, what I would say is that I'm fairly cosmopolitan in my gender role identity because I will do some things that are typically male roles, and then I will also in take care of things that are typically seen as the females' roles. So the question is how conformist how conforming is your gender identity to the gender roles that go with your culture. And I might ask the question, in fact, we will talk about this on Thursday night. I'll ask you the question, do we have gender roles now? Do gender roles still exist? And how strong and all encompassing are these gender roles? Right? And then we'll differentiate all of these ideas of beliefs about how you should act in certain situations, stereotypes, identity, gender roles. These are all different from your sexual orientation, which is the which is your preference for sexual partners. And so that's going to be different, if you will, than all of these gender terms that we're talking about. And I do want you to be aware when we're talking about gender roles, we're not talking about sexual orientation or who you find sexually attracted to, who you are sexually attracted to. Instead, we are talking about sort of the cultural values, norms, and rules uh, that and expectations that go along with calling yourself a male or a female. Okay, now let's look over here. And again, I'm not sure how relevant attitudes are changing so quickly. And I feel like some of this book is written for a late 20th century world and not the 21st 20, 2023 where we're living right now. But tell me if these gender stereotypes are true. So typically with guys, we're supposed to be active, analytical, athletic, competitive. We're the breadwinners. We're supposed to be good at math. We're supposed to be strong and have big chests, right? And we're supposed to be immune to pressure and be willing to stand on principle. Does that sound about right to you? So, females, are you supposed to be artistic and creative and gentle and emotional and nurturing and understanding? This is sort of the female stereotype. Would you say that's that rings true? Are these two stereotypes true? And so, gender stereotypes are just these widely shared beliefs about how we should belong. And really, you can think of these gender stereotypes, they sort of think of men as instruments and women in terms of expressiveness. So you've got sort of this difference between Mars and Venus, male and female, if you will. Now, within these broad gender stereotypes we have, there are great variations. I have met some incredibly competitive and aggressive females in my life. And some of the fellows I know were some of the most artistic, sensitive, and creative people you know. So there is wide variation in these. But these sort of represent the two ways in which we think about males and females. What I'm going to ask you to consider on Thursday night when we get together is, are these stereotypes limiting in some way? Or how flexible are these stereotypes for people these days? And what happens in a world where these stereotypes are more rigid and people are not allowed to vary across them? I'd be curious to find out where you think we're at with gender stereotypes in this world. Now, how is gender learned? Got a cool video that I'm going to show you on Thursday, and it demonstrates what we call gender role socialization. Basically, we all learn the roles and rules of being a male or female. Now, again, we're not talking about your sexual orientation, who you prefer, who you find sexually attractive. We're not talking about that. But we're talking about learning to wear dresses or wear suits, to wear hats or to wear ties, what uh, colors you choose to wear. And these are all learned, in a sense, as a part of our development process. Our environment teaches these things. If you go some places in the world, what you're going to see, it is quite normal for men to wear skirts and robes. If you come to South Georgia, where I'm from, men are not allowed to wear skirts at all. So it's not biological, it's completely culture, right? Cultural. In some cultures, males are allowed to wear facial paint and coloring. In my culture, males are not allowed to wear that at all. So it all depends on how your culture socializes you for these particular behaviors. Now, what are some of the processes in gender role socialization? The first is reinforcement and punishment. So in a sense, your parents are going to reward you for doing gender specific things or for uh, falling into their gender role expectations by smiling at you when you do the right thing and by frowning at you when you do the wrong thing. Uh, your friends in kindergarten are going to punish you if you talk to the wrong gender or play with the wrong toy. And you're going to have friends if you play with the toy for your appropriate gender role. So we're going to be rewarded and punished by our parents, by our friends, by our teachers, and by our peers. Now, we didn't really talk a ton about behaviors, but behaviorism works by rewarding behaviors that the teacher wants you to perform and by punishing behaviors that the teacher doesn't want you to perform. And anyone can be a teacher if they can provide you with a reinforcement, something you like, or punish you by doing something you don't like. And so, what you're going to find is that little boys and little girls are first reinforced by their parents, and then when they get to kindergarten, they separate out by boys and by girls. And children who don't follow the appropriate gender roles quickly become outcasts in kindergarten and first grade. And so all of this really causes us to adopt and learn the gender roles that go with our particular culture. And what you're going to notice, and I would say this may be true, especially in the South where I grew up, uh, the punishment is going to be more is going to be the punishment is going to be more serious for boys who violate gender norms than for girls who violate gender norms. So, in growing up in the South where I grew up, we did have a couple of female football players and a couple of female baseball players in the 80s. Some of those females that were good enough to participate with the young, the boys in elementary and middle school. And that was kind of acceptable. But there is absolutely no way that a boy in my community would ever have thought to become a cheerleader. That would have been social death in my world. Now, things are a little bit different. We are in the 21st century. I'm talking about the 1980s in Georgia and North Carolina and Alabama, where I come from. But what you're going to notice is that if there is any gender role variance, it's more acceptable for females to vary outside their gender roles than it is for males. Now, we also learn not only are we learning by being punished or rewarded, but we also learn by modeling other people whom we like. So we see male pop stars, female pop stars, and we look to copy those kinds of stars. One of the things that I noticed in the 80s, Madonna was a huge, y'all don't even know who Madonna is. It's only been 40 years. She was a huge star, and all the females adopted Madonna's dress style in the 1980s. So we all sort of engage in this observational learning where we look and copy those people we like. And you know what? You're going to notice, especially, we don't even have to talk about pop stars. You're going to see children like to imitate their parents, and the child is typically going to imitate their same sex parent to sort of engage in their roles. The little boy might hold up his dad's tool, or the little girl may try on her mom's makeup. And so, in a sense, there's this copycat behavior instinct that's built into children. So, not only are we punished or rewarded for engaging in these behaviors, but we also look around and copy people who impress us. And then just a quick note about self socialization. what you're going to notice is that typically around 2 or 3, children will begin identifying themselves as male or female, and they're going to begin to organize their way of behaving and thinking in terms of these gender lines. Okay. Now, uh, transgenderism, early childhood education, this sexual socialization in uh, in elementary and middle school. These are very, very complex questions, and to come down on one side or the other, I think it's a bit premature. Uh, but it is, this gender socialization and the expectation that society has about organizing ourselves into categories um, is a very complex and important issue. And I'm not going to suggest that you have any opinion one way or another about the politics of gender as it exists in today's world. I would just ask you to think thoughtfully and carefully about how gender and sex are learned and managed in our current world. Um, because all kinds of interesting things are going on right now, I think that are going to have huge impacts for our society. Okay, let's see. Just some basic notes about where it's come. Of course, they did some meta-analysis, and they find that parents tend to encourage gender-appropriate kinds of play. Again, I'm going to show you a video about that on Thursday. And again, as I said, boys have less leeway to play with feminine toys than do girls with masculine toys. So you talk to most of the men from where I grew up in South Georgia in the 70s and 80s, and most dads would be willing to buy their daughter a football, but would under no circumstances ever buy their boy a doll. Um, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that was the reality of where I grew up with. And, there's a huge debate right now in our society about socialization and books um, in our in our world, and uh, picture books by parents do tend to depict gender stereotypic activities. I think the big problem right now is there are people who are want books that do not depict gender stereotypic activities or treat gender socialization more flexibly. And this is a question, a debate that exists right now. Should we allow non-normative gender books uh, in early education? And honestly, I do not have the expertise or the understanding to make a judgment one way or the other about this. But I would say that these books do have an impact. What that impact is remains to be seen. What you're going to notice is that peers, like I said, around kindergarten, we tend to separate into same gender groups. And what you're going to notice is that your boys tend to like to play in big rough and tumble groups where individual friendships aren't quite as intimate, and your females tend to like smaller groups and more intimate groups. And as you probably noticed, you are supposed to stay with your boy groups or your girl groups. Um, and I'm not sure this stuff down here, when it turns to schools, really exists anymore. Um, I would say boys given more attention, given more help, praised more often, and scolded more often is what they say. Gender bias in academic and career counseling. Boys advised to go into math and science fields or to pursue higher status careers. you know, I'm not sure they're doing that anymore. Females, the number of females in college, the number of females in the science programs suggest actually now that boys, to some degree, tend to be getting left behind in higher academic environments. And that's actually problematic because now we've got our boys aren't doing as well, and we need to take care of them. But there may be some gender bias in schools, especially when it turns when it relates to whether or not children pursue gender specific career goals. Okay. Um, and then your TV commercials. Also, the media does tend to support this gender role socialization. Um, Now, whether or not the media portrays a conventional sense of gender anymore is up for debate. Um, but there is no doubt that the media plays a huge role in shaping our attitudes about what it means to be male or female. So again, are these are sort of the role expectations for males and females. Males are supposed to achieve more, be aggressive, sexual, independent. Um, are females, again, I don't know. I'm an old guy, and in our world, it was like this for females. Do females today who are graduating high school, is there the marriage mandate and the mother mandate? Are females feeling the pressure to engage in these sort of mandates? I'm almost wondering because one of the things that I've noticed is that age at first marriage is getting later. People aren't having children anymore. I'm wondering if these role expectations are as strong for females as they have been in the past. Now, these gender roles probably served some use back before modern society made it possible for people to exist uh, without, outside of this survival for life and death. In a traditional hunting and gathering society or a society with no technology, no power, you may have to divide these social roles may play more may have more value. The question is, these roles do kind of limit us in what we can do, and the question is, if we don't need these gender roles and they limit us, you know, are these gender roles good or bad? Should we think about jettisoning parts of these gender roles in today's modern society? How valuable is gender in a modern gender role socialization and this big dichotomy between males and females? Is it really necessary in the 21st century? Okay. Now, we're running out of time. So, one of the things we'll talk about on Thursday is the problems with these roles. So, there are some things that my male friends do that I think is problematic, and they do a lot of these problematic behaviors in order to prove that they're men. And my wife does report to me that she has some female friends that suffer because they feel limited by their role as a female in this society. One of the things I'd like to talk about on Thursday is the limitations of these gender roles that we do have built into our society. Okay? Now, and then I want to encourage all of you to be a little bit like David Bowie and to break those gender roles. You know what? Just because you're a male doesn't mean you can't be sensitive and thoughtful and caring. And just because you're feminine doesn't mean you can't be assertive and competitive and aggressive. And so I'm not saying you necessarily have to wear weird clothes or cut your hair in strange ways so that nobody can tell you're a male or a female. But what I'm going to talk about on Thursday is hopefully uh, you will learn to free yourself up from some of the limitations that unfortunately are attached to the roles of male and female in this society. So both of these roles have limitations if you decide to exist within them too rigidly. Okay, so let's go ahead and go here. It is 9:50. Mm, As you walk through the week, walk through your world this week, notice the ways in which you are asked to be male or female. What kinds of behaviors are you expected to do? What kind of feelings are you expected to have? How do people look at you when you walk up to them and they notice that you're a male or a female? What does it mean? How do these gender roles affect our day to day existence? Hopefully, you'll have something interesting to talk about on Thursday night. Iris, thanks for coming. Ronique, thanks for coming today. You folks have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you Thursday night in the webinar. Take care and have a great day.